This RealAg Radio podcast episode is brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. When tank mixed with glyphosate, Focus Herbicide provides a complete solution. Broadleaf burn-off and extended control on key grassy and broadleaf weeds like wild oats, bromes, and kochia in lentils, wheat, and more. See your local retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/ca today.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Monday, March 10th, and I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and yes, it is Agronomic Monday. Now, there's just so much going on in the world right now that we are going to do a news segment at the very end of the show. So please stick around for that. We've got some significant news. And you know what? For once, it's not all centered on America, which is kind of a breath of fresh air. But I don't know if it's worse, just as bad. Hard to say. But we did get word, if you listen to Friday's show, during Friday's show, we did, of course, get some news on some announcements by the federal government about some money for FCC. So we'll get you some details on that. We also did get news last week that India is extending the time that Canadian peas will not be subject to a tariff. So that's some good news. We'll get those details as well. The bad news, though, in case you haven't heard, is that China has put significant tariffs on Canadian products, many of them agricultural products, including canola meal and canola oil, but not canola seed. So there are some important details here. Nonetheless, if you noticed, the market's doing some unfun things today. That's probably why. So we'll get you all those details. Again, that's at the end of today's show, so stick around for that. After the break, it is, of course, Agronomic Monday, and so Peter Wheat Johnson is going to join me. We got several things on the docket. Of course, apparently it will be spring at some point. The winter wheat crop is going to wake up, and it's got some sulphur needs that we need to address, so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk a bit about some upcoming events that Pete is involved with, of course. But we're going to tackle some strip tillage, some manure application, all sorts of great things. So Pete will join me for two segments, the second and the fourth. In between there, we've got a product spotlight. So stick around for that as well. And then, as I promised, we'll get to the news at the end of the day. Now, if you've got feedback on today's show or you want more details, and you probably are going to want more details on a lot of the things that I'm going to cover in the news, head on over to RealAgriculture.com. Now, that is our website. There you will find all of the interviews that we do. We also have written components, especially for the news. It'll link you to all our video series, etc. It also is where, if you head on over to realagriculture.com/subscribe, hit that page, you can actually choose all the different topics you're interested in, and you can get these email blasts directly to your phone or to your laptop every morning, and make sure that you're up to date. The news is happening so incredibly quickly, and we really do try our best to cover everything as it happens as best as we can. And that means that you get the news directly first thing in the morning. And that's incredibly important. So, that's realagriculture.com/subscribe. Go check it out. Now, I did want to send a shout out to my colleague, Bern Tobin. He was also at Commodity Classic last week. Of course, Sean was there too, but Bern covered the trade show and got some really fantastic equipment coverage and a few other really cool stories. So head on over to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe there, and you can check out all the cool stuff that Bern covered at Commodity Classic, including, and this is sort of an inside joke that we have here at Real Agriculture, that for whatever reason, small square balers are incredibly popular as YouTube videos. And so, yes, of course, there is one on there from Commodity Classic. Anyway, so if you didn't get to the show, you want to see what was there and get a walk around of some of the cool equipment that was there, Bern Tobin collected all that, and that is over at our YouTube channel as well. All right, if you've got feedback on today's show, 1-855-76-6147, or of course, you can zip me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. You can do like some of our friends did last week, and you can nominate one of your fellow farmers to be on the Farmer Rapid Fire. Please do. We appreciate it. And I did want to, in case I forget for the rest of the show, have you ever been in a field and perhaps scouting, or maybe you've just finished the planting pass or the seeding pass, and you're like, why on earth is my soil like a brick? In some areas, it totally makes sense, right? Headlands, etc., compaction, sure. But there are actually chemical reasons as well as physical reasons why soil can get, as Jen Dolman would say, really, really tight. So on tonight's episode of The Agronomist, we are going to get into that. So I've got Laura Van Aert from the University of Guelph. I've got Jody DeJong-Hughes from the University of Minnesota. They're going to join me tonight on The Agronomist, 8 p.m. Eastern, to talk about why soil becomes a brick and what you can do about it. So check that out tonight. All right, let's get to a break. I'll be back with Peter Repeat Johnson right after this.
Big thanks to AGI for having us down here at Commodity Classic. Joined right now by Jeff Cruzen, Dryer Business Development Rep.
With a dryer, it's almost like an insurance policy. It allows you that flexibility to start your harvest earlier and control your harvest operations. We know we're going to have to dry some of it. We hope we don't have to dry all of it. The problem with taking your grain to a commercial operation to be dried is you're at their mercy. You don't have that flexibility. If it gets full, they have to shut down for the day. When you have your own dryer, then you have total control about how your harvest is going to move forward. Maybe you have an off-farm job. You need to have that flexibility to harvest your corn, but still hold your off-farm job. Let's say you're coming to me and you say, Jeff, what do I need for a dryer? What's an average harvest day for you? And then we're going to say, what's a big harvest day for you? And then we'll size the dryer around that. So we're going to plan for today, but we're also going to talk about where you're headed to in the future. A dryer is a large capital investment, but you also need to plan where you're going to be, not where you are today.
You can reach out to Jeff by going to egggrowth.com.
What people are excited about right now is Excite Bio Yield Plus. It's a phosphate solubilizing ag biological that works on oilseeds, cereals, and legumes. I'm Eva Smuck and I work at Excite Biotechnologies. For over a decade, we have been helping farmers to achieve healthier plants and better yields with our premium liquid inoculants. You can learn more by calling 1-855-EXCITE-BIO or by searching Excite Bio online. That's XITEBIO.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. This segment is brought to you by MMP Ag Intellect. Maximize productivity and profitability with an innovative all-in-one approach to farming. Combining accounting, business planning, agronomic field planning, and advanced technology, MMP Ag Intellect delivers personalized solutions that empower you to make confident, data-driven decisions. Visit mmp.ca today. Well, I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. It is Agronomic Monday, and therefore, lucky everyone, we've got Peter Repeat Johnson joining me for a few segments. Pete, how are you?
I'm absolutely awesome, Lyndsey. How could you be anything else? The sun is shining. The temperatures are warm. The wheat is going to start taking off here later this week. And I'm just back from a week of a break week in Costa Rica. And so Wheat Pete is ready to rumble.
Pete does not have kids at home. You can tell, because it's also spring break here in Ontario. And it's also the time change. So, Pete, I will welcome your enthusiasm, but I don't know if I share it today. But we're going to try. At least I'm excited about all things agronomy. Now, yes, quick note. You did manage to find some time to get away for a week, which I think is absolutely fantastic. These are very important things. You also have, before we get into the agronomic stuff, you've also got... for those who follow along, they'll know that you do take part in your local theater, and you are working on your next show. And I wanted to give a shout out to that. Tell us about your next production.
So our next production at Thistle Theatre in the mighty metropolis of Embro is called Email. It's actually written by a local person, Joan Veldman. She has unfortunately passed away, but she was a thespian in Embro and other places. And it's our 30th anniversary. We missed celebrating 25 of Thistle Theatre. So a local play, what could be better? So Email, and that mail is spelled M-A-L-E. Is just a ton of fun. It's a heartwarming story, but it's also got lots of laughs. It runs the last week of March, the first week of April at the Town Hall in Embro. And man, if yeah, come out and see it. It's just an awesome show. And Pete will be on stage in a different role again. I just, Lyndsey, I got to say, I love theater because every role I have, it forces you to become someone else. And in that process, you evolve, you develop, and you learn new skills. And that part of theater is just quite incredible. So this role, again, different than any other role I've had before. And yeah, just lots of fun in theater. That's all there is to it.
Do you get to wear crazy hats? Because often your roles come with hats, which we appreciate.
So I'm not 100% sure yet. We haven't finalized the costume. It is set in the middle of a blizzard, so
okay. So maybe
there are some different hats that show up for sure. Whether one will be on Stanley's head or not, I'm not quite sure.
All right, we will. You'll have to check it out. Now, you did want to. There's also an associated project going on called I Am Enough that I want to send a shout out to as well. What's that about?
So Coffee Talk Theater Productions is doing the I Am Enough show, and that's Sherry Garner, also a local Embro lady, a woman that grew up on a farm in Embro. She moved away. She had an acting career across Canada, and so over that time frame, she really had some struggles along the way with some mental health issues. And so I Am Enough is a musical, fun, comical story of her life. And we will be delivering that again at the kickoff for the Cross Canada tour of I Am Enough. It starts in Embro with a show on Friday, April the 11th, and then 2 shows on Saturday, April the 12th. It's an hour and a half session of just a whole bunch of good stories and good fun. And we really are trying to focus on the agricultural community, Lyndsey, because, man, when you step back and you think of all the, well, you're going to talk about news today. And when has there been this much news that all adds stress on farmers in terms of tariffs, in terms of what happens to our markets? Where does our beef go to get killed? Like all of these things, tremendous stress. And meanwhile, you might have 50 million or 60 or whatever huge number invested. The stress can just become really, really challenging. So there will be lots of different organizations there that offer support, but the show is really just to come out and have a bit of fun and some camaraderie and hear one person's story told in an amazing way. And by the way, Sherry is an incredible singer, and just that part alone is worth the price of admission.
All right. Okay. So everybody, now we know what you're doing on the weekend of April 11th, 12th. And that is, of course, after catching Wheat Pete in action at the Thistle Theater. Okay. So let's switch gears then. And Pete, I'll be honest, you know, your enthusiasm over the weather means that you haven't been in Eastern Ontario. Because, well, we had a relatively low snow load until, I don't know, mid-January, and then we've been walloped. And I woke up to more snow today, Pete. So I would tell you that I feel like we're a long ways away from the winter wheat waking up, but of course I'm much further away from you. So is this the week that the winter wheat breaks dormancy, and what does that mean for our agronomic decisions?
Yeah, and so Lyndsey, just that little discussion you had there about the differences in Ontario really do describe how tough it is for a guy sitting in Ingersoll today to know what's happening across the province. And that's just the province. That doesn't include Western Canada or down into the US or whatever else. And when you talk about snow load, when have we had such a big snow load and so many buildings collapse? And you're not alone in terms of that snow load. My brother Paisley had to get up on his roofs and shovel them off this winter. He hasn't had to do that since he bought the place back in 1990 or whatever year that, I think it was 1990. So, you know, just a ton of snow out there in some areas. In other areas, there's almost none. And so we have, it was above zero here yesterday. And we are talking about double-digit temperatures this week, several days. And when we get double-digit temperatures, we get 5 days or 7 days where we get positive growing degree accumulations, the wheat breaks dormancy. Now, if it's under the snow, like it is, up in the Ottawa area, it's above zero, it's still not going to break dormancy because the snow has to go first. But when we get down into Essex County along Lake Erie, where there's less snow, yep, we're going to get these temperatures. The wheat's going to break dormancy. And so a few things that happen. Number one, I've talked lots this winter about how important early sulphur seems to be. And so there's lots of new data coming out. This sulphur story is just phenomenally interesting in terms of how that has changed over my career from zero response to now we seem to need it in many crops. Wheat is one of the most responsive, and we thought that the timing wasn't that critical, but what we're learning more and more is that the nutrient that the wheat needs the most as it breaks dormancy and starts to grow is sulfur. And if you don't get that early sulfur on, it seems like you limit yield potential. It's not the end of the world, but you might give up 5 or 6 or 8 bushels per acre if that wheat crop starves for sulfur early. Now, I can't say that for sure because we don't have long-term data on this, but certainly from the 2024 spring, if you didn't get out there early with sulfur, you didn't get the maximum yield potential that you could have. So wheat breaks dormancy, we get that cold night, man, I'm going to have my growers, if the snow is gone, the snow has to be gone. You can't do it until the snow goes, but that early shot of sulfur, if you can at all, get it on. You're not going to lose it. Keep the nitrogen rate low from that perspective. We could get into a month of warm, wet weather, in which case we'll lose a lot of nitrogen. I don't want to see a big nitrogen application, but the sulfur early is incredibly critical.
Okay, so and that is a good point, Pete. You're not saying go out and get all your fertility on there that you would typically do as your early. That it's the sulfur component that we're focused on here for this very early application.
Exactly, and we don't want to put the nitrogen at risk. Fortunately, sulfur isn't the same as nitrogen. They're similar, but they're not the same. So we don't lose the sulfur from with the nitrogen. We lose the nitrogen to the atmosphere, right? It denitrifies. Well, the sulfur, it doesn't desulfify, if you will. So it hangs around much longer than the nitrogen this time of year. And yeah, when the nutrient uptake data that Shane and I put together, that publication should be out very shortly. Josh Naselski working on it hard, and our reviewers, I think, are finally to the point where we have it put together well. So that will hit the peer-reviewed research shortly. But man, sulfur is the nutrient that the wheat crop takes up most rapidly in the early spring. Sulfur and potash, but potash we don't really seem to get much yield response. Sulfur we absolutely do.
Okay. Now, just quickly before we throw to a break, as you mentioned, we're still waiting for the winter wheat crop to wake up. But further south, of course, they're blessed. They get much warmer than we do much sooner. But we do keep our eye to the south to see what conditions are like, not just for markets, but also for pests, etc. So what do we know about we're going to talk about Kentucky here quickly. The winter canola overwintering, the winter wheat overwintering, a difference between the two.
So while we were getting tons of snow, Lyndsey, Kentucky was getting tons of rain. So they already, by the 1st of May, they got a 7-inch downpour in one day, on 1st of March, right around the 1st of March. Phil Needham sent me a picture of a wheat field. The grower had 400 acres of wheat, and the only wheat that was not underwater was one very tiny strip along a road. Everything else was underwater. They had tons of erosion. They've had up to 18 inches of rainfall already in 2025. Wow. So, yeah, totally different weather. The winter canola looks like it might be a disaster. Winter canola is always a little bit tough. It can look that can look bad and then come back better than you would expect. But right now, they think the winter canola there is pretty much a write-off. The winter wheat looks like it's survived the winter okay, but lots of water is never a good thing for the wheat crop. Totally different weather than what we've had up here in Ontario.
Okay. All right. We're going to take a quick break, Pete, and we'll be back after. We're going to go to a product spotlight now, and then Pete and I will be back right after this.
At Alliance Seed, every seed starts the story of your success. With Alliance Seed varieties, you're not just planting seeds, you're planting the promise of a prosperous future. Our top-performing wheat, barley, oat, pea, and lentil varieties are tailored to meet the unique challenges of your farm, ensuring high yields, strong standability, and reliable disease resistance. Discover the Alliance difference at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
We are here at the Helena booth. Joining us is Alex Park,
the division agronomist for Wyoming, Colorado, West Nebraska, and West Kansas.
Heading into this 25 season, what are some of the agronomic things that growers are thinking about?
Efficiency, period. There's a lot of unknowns, so if we can take the edge off our risk by increasing the efficiency of, particularly on our fertility programs, and making sure that our fertility programs deliver us ecosystem services where things like phosphorus and potassium can deliver drought resilience, de-risks my operation, can be really huge for us. If I could beg anybody to do one thing, let's take a soil test. Find out what is in your bank. You spent a lot of money on this land. What's in the ground? How can we efficiently extract the nutrients at a reasonable pace at the right time? Can't do that without a soil test. Find out what your investment is, and that's going to let you make the right decisions on your fertility program. If you don't have that, you're starting from a place where how much nutrients is that crop going to extract, and that's not as efficient as you could be.
Make sure you go to research.innovate-ag.ca or HelenaAgra.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am Lyndsey Smith, and it is time for today's Product Spotlight, brought to you by Nufarm. I've got Darren Froats. He's the Regional Sales Manager for the Eastern Prairies with Nufarm. Darren, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic.
Well, it is, we are into March. It means that spring will come. I have faith that it will, even though maybe today it doesn't feel like it. So planning is well underway. We're talking today about soil active herbicides. Why should farmers consider applying a soil active herbicide this spring?
Well, there's many reasons that it's a good plan to put into any operation. If you look outside right now, we start to have snow disappearing and stubble starting to show. And the nice part is with the Nufarm portfolio is you have 2 times of application windows. You got fall and you also have spring. So if you weren't able to get out in the fall and apply our Fierce or Volterra products, there is still time this spring. So follow your certain crop labels and make sure that the labels follow to specifically how it's set up. And there's opportunity to still get these products down this spring. The idea would be to try and get them on as early as possible so you have moisture activate them and start that residual weed control.
All right, so we have not missed our window on using these. These tools, these soil active herbicides, they can certainly play a role in resistance management. How do these products do that? Expand on how these products work. How do they work when we're thinking about herbicide resistance management?
Yeah, so Fierce from Nufarm is a group 14 and 15. So you have 2 modes of action in there. Ideally, one is a strong grass product and the other one is a strong broadleaf weed product. And they both actually have activity on kochia. So kochia specifically is what you're looking at targeting. It's a real good product to use to manage resistance issues and to introduce 2 modes of action working together in the soil at the same time. So one of the group 15s more or less kills the weeds underneath the soil base, where the group 14 pinches off the weed as they come through the soil surface. So when you're kind of tricking and changing how those different weeds function and grow, it definitely helps managing the weed control at that time.
Getting them early, which is really important. All right. Now, speaking of early, and you did mention these are things that we could apply in the fall potentially, but if we miss that window, we still have an option in the spring. How early can farmers go out? When is too late?
For sure. It depends on product specific and of course crop specific. But let's just use lentils, for example. You have a window of 7 days prior to seeding with small reds. Ideally, I would encourage growers to get that on as soon as possible. So as soon as you're able to get that equipment out of the shed and safely across the ground without making a bunch of ruts in soft ground, I would get that product on and apply it so that you have the ability to capture spring moisture. These products do need roughly 2/10 to half an inch of moisture to have them effectively wash into the soil and be active. And in the spring, temperatures start to warm the soil microbes start to warm up, and when weeds start actively growing, that's when you're going to start to see these products kick in and start to work. So it does give you that 6 to 8 week residual window. There is a bit of strategy behind it too. If you also wish to use it closer to seeding time, depending on the crop, there is different timelines on how soon you can use the product to the planting window. Depending on when that is, you can get fairly close to the planting window. And ideally, if you catch a rain at the right time, then you can kind of extend that residual window further out. So they got some flexibility in these products, and you really have to take a look at them and look at which crop you're using them for, which situation that you want to do, which weed you're targeting, of course, or weeds, and make a plan from there.
Now, so you mentioned that 6 to 8 weeks of residual control, certainly depending on the crop type, can be an incredible advantage for our less competitive crops. Are there certain crop types that this works better for, or is it really just a fit for so many different systems?
Well, yeah, Lyndsey, it's a fit for so many different systems for sure. Pulse is number one. That's where a lot of our these products are used, is in front of pulses. Typically, they're not as competitive a crop getting established in the spring, and also not a lot of herbicide options either in crop to take out weed issues. So they have been very popular in pulses. However, in cereal crops, whether it's Valterra with barley or Fierce with spring wheat, they have some very good uses in those crops. They compete very well, and with the amount of pressure that a cereal crop can put on competing weeds, along with a residual product like these, it can keep these crops fairly clean, fairly late into the year. And that way it gives you some different options to go in crop when it's time to spray your in crop, and maybe you don't have to use maybe quite as expensive a product in crop to control the weed portfolio that you're looking at. There's just so many good uses for them. It spreads out the workload on the farm. I would still recommend using a burn off with these products. They don't always have activation at the time of when weeds start to express themselves in the spring. So if you're going across it in the spring, I would still recommend adding in a burn off product with these products, and make sure you take out the flush of weeds that's already established. Typically, these products like to take out weeds that have come from seed, not that are overwintered or previously established.
Right. Okay. That's an excellent point. All right. And lastly, of course, for anyone who's, thinking that this is something they need to add to the toolbox, where can they find more information on these Nufarm products?
Yeah, contact any of your local Nufarm territory managers. You can also contact our website at nufarm.ca. We also have the best darn 1-800 line in the business at 1-800-868-5444. Darlene would love to talk to you. And please reach out if you have any additional questions.
All right. Give Darlene a call. Ring those phones, everybody. All right. Okay, Darren, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Lyndsey. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
There's power, and then there's superpower. Advancing the unstoppable superpower of pre-seed from Nufarm. Take control. Eliminate weed competition and start clean in spring. Manage weeds early in canola, cereals, and pulses. Conquer, Goldwing, Thunderhawk, and Blackhawk EVO. Convenient formulations and multiple modes of action. Add more power to glyphosate, more benefits to your burn down. Go to nufarm.ca/burndown.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147. It is Agronomic Monday. And we are calling all Montana, Dakotas, and northern Minnesota growers. The new seed, Omega-3 Canola Production System, can help you unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities, first-in-class agronomy support, and free on-farm pickup after harvest. To learn more, visit omega3canola.com. That's omega, the number 3, canola.com. All right, joining me now back after our product spotlight is Peter Johnson, our resident agronomist here with Real Agriculture. I am Lyndsey Smith, and Pete, it is, so as I mentioned off the top, it is our spring break here for our kids here in Ontario. It is also the Ottawa Valley Farm Show happening this week. It typically also is the maple syrup season, the heart of it for up here. I'll be honest though, we're just getting going because of the difference in the weather. And there is a correlation sometimes between the kind of syrup season we get and the kind of spring we get. So what say you so far? What kind of spring are we going to get?
So the sap run here in the deep southwest, of course, starts before yours does, Lyndsey. And it did start 2 weeks ago, I think. They tapped. And as soon as they were sticking taps in the trees, that the sap was starting to run. So there was a very short, brief, early run with a couple of warm days. Yesterday, I thought, because down here we were 9 degrees Celsius, we peaked out at that. And it was sunshine, and that's typically what you need is a cold night and then a warm, sunny day to get that sap running. I thought the sap would be just a river. Unfortunately, it was just a drip. So we still haven't made a lot of maple syrup here yet. We're looking to make more because Pete loves maple syrup. But yes, I think even here we're just at the beginning of the run. It's not been quite as strong as what maybe we would have expected. Last year, the exact opposite. It was all early. This year, it looks like we're going to have more in the traditional time frame, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, last year I think there's probably people that might have missed some because it happened so early. Had we been doing syrup, that would have been us. So there you go. Okay, but go out, buy your maple syrup. Very Canadian. Buy Canadian. There you go. Okay. We did touch on what's happening down in Kentucky with the weather and heard from Phil Needham, good friend of the show. But Pete, in talking about what's happening down there, you mentioned clover not doing so well. And tell me about this Balanza clover. I don't think I've ever heard of this. So what's the story here?
Oh, yeah. So Balanza clover, there's many different clovers, right, Lyndsey?
Yes.
And it's just like a family of sisters that, they're all sisters, but they can all be quite different. And we love double cut or single cut red clover here in Ontario. And that's because it works so well for us. And we have the data, we have the science that shows how much nitrogen that red clover can bring. We've often looked at crimson clover as a cover crop because crimson clover as a seedling is a much more aggressive seedling than red clover is. So the wheat comes off. If we plant red clover, it's slow to start and we don't think we get the benefit. We use crimson clover much quicker out the gate. We get this stand of clover and we think, gosh, we've really done something. Then you look at how much nitrogen the crimson clover fixes, and that's been a little bit more disappointing. So we haven't seen that nitrogen come to the table. Balanza clover, which again has been talked about and been around, but not as much in the mainstream, Balanza clover appears to fix more nitrogen than the crimson clover does. So some people have looked at Balanza clover. One of the challenges with Balanza for Ontario is that it's not that aggressive as a seedling and it doesn't overwinter as well. In Kentucky, again, they went to Balanza clover thinking it would fix more nitrogen. And in particular, Balanza clover is more like hairy vetch. So we can use hairy vetch here. It can be a weed problem, so be careful with that. But hairy vetch is an excellent nitrogen fixing crop, but it fixes most of its nitrogen in the spring. And so in Ontario, typically we don't want to leave that hairy vetch very long to fix nitrogen in the spring, just like we wouldn't want to leave Balanza clover because we want to plant the corn, that first week of May, that last week of April. And on a year like this, you don't get much season for those crops to fix nitrogen in the spring. In Kentucky, they have a little longer season. The Balanza clover looked like a good deal, but guess what? just like the winter canola down there, the Balanza clover, they basically can't find even one plant left alive. So if it dies over winter, it's not fixing much nitrogen in the spring. And that's always one of the challenges, right, Lyndsey? We talk about the challenges with red clover, getting it to establish. Well, these other ones have issues as well.
Here's a sheep saying for you, Pete, because it's the same thing. Dead clover fixes no end. Dead sheep pay no bills. So let's put it that way. Okay. Same idea. Yeah. Who wants all those sheep if they're not going to pay bills? So same thing with clover.
I hope that's not a segue into that you've been having issues in the flock.
No, actually, I will say, touch wood, this winter has gone as much as it's been a harder winter, temperature-wise, et cetera. No, the sheep are doing well. I think in some ways, we've had maybe more consistent cool temps, which is usually better on livestock, which is nice. And our neighbor has been hunting coyotes like you wouldn't believe and being successful. And so, again, touch wood, we got through. We have certain times of year that are worse for coyote attacks, and we got through February. That's usually a bad one, with none. So hats off to my neighbor. I do appreciate the work you're doing because we definitely were facing increasing pressure by coyotes. So always nice to get a bit of a break on that one. Switching gears, let's talk a little bit about strip till, manure, etc. There's been more interest in strip tillage equipment, let's say, in using manure in rotation. And Pete, some of this may be linked to the fact that there's been funding for farmers to be able to access some of this equipment. But does that mean it was the best choice to actually buy or integrate some of these practices? What say you?
And so I think, Lyndsey, that it's absolutely good to try these new practices. So I've talked about on the Word, and actually today, Manure Monday, we heard from the people at Cornell University, Corinne Ketterings and Kirsten Workman, about this whole manure thing. And what's really interesting on the manure front is that we don't always see the benefit out of the nitrogen that we should see. We test the manure. We say, oh gosh, there's 140 pounds of nitrogen in the manure that should be available. And then we use it, count on the 140 pounds, and we get 50 pounds. And then if we didn't apply nitrogen, we're short. Well, this manure is a great resource, by the way, and I'm not knocking it at all. And if you can use manure, it brings lots to the table. Mm-hmm. And I think that the programs that support, like off-calf, where you can buy manure, and the off-calf program will help you buy that manure if you replace commercial fertilizer with the manure. And that's a good thing because it gets the manure over more acres. The challenge is to know the value of that manure. And so the stuff that Cornell's doing around the microbiology in the soil and testing in June, pre-citrate nitrate time, to say, have the microbiology that work on manure, have they ramped up their numbers so that nitrogen will be available? Or for some reason, did they not ramp up? Maybe that will help us better predict the nitrogen availability out of that manure. So is it a good thing to spread the manure over more acres? Absolutely. Is it a good thing to have that funding available so that happens? 100%, because we get, big livestock facilities, we get too much manure too close to home, and it's a logistics thing. But when we have a few extra dollars to get that manure moved and where we don't generally apply it, it's a huge win. We still have to figure the nitrogen component out. And so if you just automatically count on that manure nitrogen, that has wheat Pete a little bit concerned because it just doesn't always come to the table. But I think the new data will get there, right? We're learning. Mm-hmm. That's the new science. The same thing happens with the strip till. By the way, Lyndsey, I've gone around this winter, the Soil and Crop Club, the Edible Bean Growers, the Ontario Bean Growers Association, I should say, and I'm pushing them hard to do less tillage, because we know that tillage erosion is 10 times worse than wind and water combined on rolling ground in places like Ontario. So And it happens over the winter. It happens in these 7-inch rain events that Kentucky got. So we have to do less tillage. We have to leave more residue out there over the winter. The real challenge with strip till, and I've pushed strip till because I really do think it has a benefit, but there's renewed interest. That's a good thing. The problem with the funding is that I have to make a decision to buy that piece of equipment, and I don't really get a chance to test that piece of equipment in my production system to know that, yes, it will work. And that's always a little bit, I don't know, worrisome for me, because it doesn't matter what piece of equipment you move from to. There's always changes. You have to learn how to make that system work. And if things don't go well the first year, it can cost you a lot of money. So I think strip till works, but I just, the fact that you can't rent it from your neighbor for 2 years or hire someone to do custom work for 2 years and, learn how that's going to work and will it work in your system. You just go out and you make that purchase, and equipment's not cheap anymore, Lyndsey. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. But
I have, in fact.
Gosh.
Yes. Yeah.
So that part of it does just niggle at the back of my brain that, man, it's the right direction, but I worry about implementation.
Try before you buy would be quite lovely. And also, like, as an observation, anytime we talk about, let's say something like, a stripper header or strip tillage or, adding some, or zero till, let's say, you change one thing and you have to change other things to go with it, which is why the evaluation part is so important, right? It gives you a couple fields or growing seasons to actually gauge what happens after.
It's a system.
That's right.
And what happens, like every time you make a tweak to that system, it changes how the system works.
That's
and
right.
You're 1,000% right, Lyndsey.
I like to hear that, Pete. You can say that anytime. All right. we are out of time for our time with Peter Johnson. I will be back after the break with the news, and I'll warn everybody. It's not great, but it's important. There's a lot that happened just since Friday. So, Pete, as you said, it's Manure Monday. It is also the Agronomist later tonight. Everybody check it out. It's going to be a good one. We're going to talk about soil dynamics and why soil turns into a brick sometimes.
And I will be in the chat.
Oh,
so
be
ready, Lyndsey.
All right. It's a good one. 8 p.m. Eastern. Check us out on YouTube. All right, Pete, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Lyndsey. It's always fun.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this. If you're applying a low-rate N stabilizer, you might be falling for a losing strategy. Low-rate products promise great results, but may lack the potency of higher active ingredient concentrations, so great isn't always what you get. Don't put yield at risk. Put your trust in proven solutions. Anvol Nitrogen Stabilizer, Super U Premium Fertilizer, and Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. These products offer higher active ingredient concentrations imitator brands can't match. See the difference at defendyourn.ca.
Find everything you need for outstanding weed control in your wheat and barley from the cross-spectrum herbicide experts at Corteva. Corteva is proud to offer a wide selection of cross-spectrum herbicides for maximum convenience, effective resistance management, and customized control of your toughest grassy and broadleaf weeds. No matter what kind of weed challenges you're experiencing, we've got the right fit for your farm. Visit corteva.ca to learn more.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. It is Monday, March 10th. Get ahead of hard-to-kill weeds with the pre-emergent soil-active herbicides Valterra EZ and Fierce EZ from Nufarm. Apply after spring thaw for up to 8 weeks of extended weed control this spring. Find out more about Nufarm products at nufarm.ca. Well, as promised, we've got a boatload of news for you. Yes, that's right. A boatload. It is legal tender. Okay. No, it's not. let's start with, yes, we're going to get to the China thing in a minute, but if you're following along, for our friends in America, we will, here in Canada, have a new prime minister at some point. We now know who that will be, and yet we haven't had an election. What the heck, you may say? Well, yes, Mark Carney was named new Liberal leader yesterday in the leadership run. So he beat out Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould, who were the front runners after Mark Carney, but it was a decisive win. Over 85% of the vote on the first ballot. Mark Carney is the new Liberal leader. Now, that doesn't automatically make him the prime minister, but that will happen. At least as of recording, it hadn't happened yet, but it will happen quite quickly. So to remind everyone, our current prime minister, Justin Trudeau, he gave his final speech last night. There will be at some point a transfer of the prime ministership from Justin Trudeau to Mark Carney as the leader of the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party is the governing party as of right now. Now, the part we don't know, and there's two interesting parts to this. We don't know exactly when he will become prime minister, but it will be soon. But the second part is we don't know when there will be our federal election. Again, likely soon, because here's the really strange part of all of this that I still can't believe is true. But Mark Carney has never actually been voted in as an MP for Canada. That's right. He will be our prime minister, but has never actually been elected to a seat in the House of Commons. It is a weird twist of the rules. Yes, it's all on the up and up as far as how Canada runs things. It's just how it can be. Now, that being said, the discussion, the analysts all seem to point to a federal election sooner rather than later, in that Carney obviously is well aware he does not have a seat and needs to remedy that as soon as possible. So we already anticipated that sometime, so at the end of, I guess it's 2 weeks now, in like 2 weeks when the prorogation was over, we were headed back. We're going to call a Parliament. Will he call the election even before then? We got to find out all those rules, but we do know that it will likely be incredibly fast. So April, May, somewhere in there, we will likely have a federal election. What does that mean for how long Carney is actually prime minister? Well, that we have to see. He may be one of the shortest serving prime ministers ever. We'll see how that goes. Trivia question for your kids one day. Okay, so we'll keep tabs on that. But the biggest news, of course, so last week on Saturday, we did get word that China was slapping tariffs on several Canadian commodities. We're talking canola, a big one, canola meal, canola oil, pork, as well as seafood and some other things. So let's break it down. What is this all about? So if you, like me, had sort of kind of forgotten about the whole thing about Canada putting 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, well, China did not forget such things. And these tariffs are essentially in response to that. Now, remember, we also have an anti-dumping investigation happening as well. So what we did learn, dated March 8th, is canola oil, canola meal, and peas from Canada will face 100% tariff as of March 20th, 2025. This, of course, is a pretty huge one. I do want to point out it is canola oil, canola meal, and peas on this end. It does not include canola seed. Nonetheless, canola markets certainly reacted negatively to this news today. But the bad news does not just, it's not just about canola, everybody. We've got several different commodities impacted by this because we've got a 25% tariff applied to Canadian pork, as well as lobster, other seafood as well. Now, the canola seed part, so this is interesting. The canola seed part is interesting because that is the part that is subject to the anti-dumping investigation. So does that mean, and this is speculation, does that mean other tariffs may be coming in when that investigation wraps up? We're not entirely sure. To sort of put a point on just how important the Chinese market is to Canadian goods, last year in 2024, canola meal to China was about $921 million, or approximately 2 million metric tons. Oil, we sent about $21 million worth of oil there, and pea exports to China were about $304 million in 2024. Now, the pea export number is an interesting one, and we actually have some news about the India tariffs as well, in that China has actually sort of saved our butt a couple times in taking some of the peas that would have gone to India that were subject to a tariff there, but we'll get into that in a minute. Now, fish and exports, also a big deal. They were worth $1.3 billion in 2024. Those are now subject to a tariff, as well as pork exports at $469 million. Now, again, all of us are suddenly very in tune with what tariffs actually mean. And tariffs are a government's way of essentially, it almost works like a basis, right? You make one good more expensive and say, we don't want it. And so it can, depending on the dynamics, it can shut out a market entirely. 100% tariff, pretty steep, likely makes things like canola oil and canola meal just a no-go for a Chinese buyer, right? It just makes them far too expensive. Now, does that mean that Canadian product won't move entirely? Absolutely not. So as we've seen in the past, where we have had perhaps non-tariff trade barriers, such as a phytosanitary restriction, anything like that, we do find that Canadian product obviously still gets sold. It just gets sold to different markets, and those markets somehow end up sending more to China. So that doesn't mean that this isn't costly, because obviously it is. This is you've seen the markets react as well. This adds another level of uncertainty during incredibly volatile, uncertain times. But it doesn't mean that product won't move. It just adds inefficiency, really, which means cost. And ultimately, when things get less efficient, it means that profit's got to come from somewhere. And unfortunately, it often hits the producer in the pocketbook. So we will be following along, see where this goes. We, of course, are getting industry reaction from this story. It is a very major one. We'll keep following that. Now, on the good news front, there isn't a lot of good news, but we're going to touch on it. India did extend the tariff exemption to Canadian peas into May of 2025. So this is for yellow peas headed into India. The government will extend the duty-free import until May 31st. So India is one of those markets that, if you are a pulse grower in Canada, you've probably heard, I guess the word tariff isn't so new when you deal in the pulse markets, in that India is one of those markets that very much uses tariffs to protect its domestic market. We did see, of course, just a few months ago that the tariff was exempted on yellow peas into India, which is good news, definitely, for the pulse industry. Typically means that there's a pretty high demand there, and so that will continue into May, which is good news. Okay, so not everything is doom and gloom. On the other, I guess, somewhat good note, but I guess there's some measured response to this. We did mention on Friday's show that we had got word that the federal government was putting in place certain measures to help counteract the negative impact of the U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. And one of those moves, of course, was putting more money in the account of Farm Credit Canada, of FCC. So this is $1 billion being not necessarily given to FCC, but FCC will be able to lend that money out up to that $1 billion for added projects. Now, as you heard on Friday's show, this has happened before during COVID, which, by the way, was 5 years ago. This week was the beginning of the pandemic. Just putting that out there, everybody. Where were you 5 years ago? Why don't you let me know? Anyway, during the pandemic, FCC was also allowed extra money to be handed out as stimulus, basically. And it basically paid it back because it didn't lend it out. So, I don't know, guys. I'll be honest. These last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, what are we even into since end of January, have just been an absolute sprint for the team here at Real Agriculture. We are trying to stay on top of all the different dynamics, all the different things happening. And frankly, there's just a lot going on. So we are going to try our best to keep you informed. As I said at the top of the show, head on over to realagriculture.com/subscribe. Every day at the end of the day, I pick the top stories that I think everybody needs tomorrow morning in their inbox. And we split it between East and West. We've got cattle, we've got machinery. You can let us know what you need there. We've definitely got some work on the dairy side. Thank you to a couple listeners who have reached out, and they've got some questions about dairy trade between the U.S. and Canada. We are going to be looking into some of those stats as well, and just trying to get our footing on what might be coming next from the U.S. administration. So yes, we're keeping on that. So if you would like, head on over there. Of course, if you've got feedback or if you've got questions, if you need some clarity on any of the stories that we've covered, 1-855-776-6147. That is our RealAg feedback line. You can give us a call there. Or, of course, you can drop me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. All right, I will be back later this week. Everyone, have a wonderful, wonderful spring break here in Ontario. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this RealAg Radio podcast, brought to you by Focus Herbicide from FMC. Lentil and wheat growers get a clean start this spring with Focus Herbicide. Along with early burn-off and extended weed control, Focus Herbicide provides excellent resistance management. See your local retailer or visit ag.fmc.com/CA today.